I had heart palpitations and chest pains, and I was spending a lot of time at home, and I stopped kind of going out, and I felt, like there was a war going on in the world and no one could see it. And it was this war on women. We worked in the sexual assault service, so lots of young women in crisis, and kind of falling through the cracks. And a colleague one day left this thing on my desk that was a checklist for vicarious trauma, which wasn't a term I'd never heard of. And I looked at it and I thought, well, I tick every box here. I tick every box.
Well, hello everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Finding Equilibrium show. Delighted to be here, delighted you're here, and delighted that my guest today is Caitlin Marshall. Now, Caitlin runs Makeshift. She's co-founder of Makeshift, which is a support and education agency that connects creativity with mental health. So, super interesting topic, really keen to dive in. But Caitlin's also a mental health educator, a social worker, and an arts enthusiast. So that's a lot there, Caitlin. Thank you so much for making time in your, what I know is a very busy schedule, to be with us. So maybe the first question is, how did you come to being co-founder of Makeshift and doing all the things that you do? Because it does feel that you've connected a number of different dots together to create that. But I'd love to understand your journey to this point.
Yeah, thanks, Lawrence. Thanks for having me. So really how it happened was that I emerged from high school I knew from about 13 that I wanted to be a social worker. I really latched onto that idea of harnessing resources to help people, I guess, overcome some of the systemic disadvantages that happen in our community. And at the same time, I was very, very drawn to creative practices, but not necessarily identifying as a creative person. So I was very good at music and really, really actually wanted to go and study music therapy, but had that very familiar common experience of a teacher who removed all the fun out of studying music. And so I ended up quitting in year 11, much to my parents' dismay, and really being quite devastated about it, but thinking, oh, well, that door closed. And so throughout my studies in social work, I was also spending all of my spare time in the theatre, doing student theatre. I was building sets and directing plays and acting in plays, and did everything there is to do in that kind of learning environment. Met my husband, he's still my husband. We met then, met lots of great people. And so really kind of found myself talking a lot in social work about this role of creativity. And it's funny now because I've found a box of old assignments, and they were all about, the role of drama in family therapy and, the role of painting in youth work. So already then I was making this connection. And I went straight out of uni to work for a young women's organisation that housed young women who were homeless. So mostly had experienced violence, sexual assault, and we ran a whole lot of programs for them. And it was a interesting organisation in that it was a flat structure. So I was, how old? 20. I had no manager. I was charged with being in charge of my own work and workload in an environment where we were working with some really significantly challenging people. So it was this quite amazing experience in that, I needed a manager at that age. I needed some guidance, a lot more than I had, but it meant I was also very free to kind of make things up. So in the absence of knowing what else to do, I drew on my love of arts and arts-based practices. So I would get these young women making costumes, doing craft, making murals, learning how to sing, and really saw the power that happened when you offered people an opportunity, particularly people having a really, really hard time, to experience themselves in a different way and experience themselves through creative release. And, you know, these were all young women experiencing trauma and chronic mental health issues, drug and alcohol, all of that kind of stuff. So then the other thing that happened, I was there for quite a few years, is that I became quite, well, the term at the time was burnt out, but I didn't really know the language of that. But I found myself, I think I was 22 or 23 by this time, you know, I had heart palpitations and chest pains, and I was spending a lot of time at home, and I stopped kind of going out, and I felt, you know, like there was a war going on in the world and no one could see it. And it was this war on women. We worked in a sexual assault service, so lots of young women in crisis, and kind of falling through the cracks. And a colleague one day left this thing on my desk that was a checklist for vicarious trauma, which wasn't a term I'd never heard of. And I looked at it and I thought, well, I tick every box here. I tick every box. So that was a really big wake-up call, which meant I ended up taking some time off. I took a few months off. I got right back into all those creative practices, like playing music, painting, drawing, all the things I'd loved and really let go of, because I was so immersed in my work. And ultimately, decided to leave that job and went and lived in Scotland for a few years, like went as far away as I possibly could. But I suppose it makes me think of how makeshift happened, because a few things I learned very early on in my working life what happens when you ignore the signs that your body is telling you, when you don't look after yourself in being an instrument of your work. And when you kind of put yourself last on the list. And I learned in a really big, hard way, like it was pretty dramatic. And no surprise because of, you know, the environment I was in. So, yeah, I suppose over time I've done lots of different jobs. I moved into adult education. I became really passionate about community development and giving people the skills to harness their own resources and get resourceful. And met Lizzie, who's the other co-founder, when I moved to Wollongong, and we met in a singing group. I'm not a particularly good singer, but I really like singing, and I suppose that's the other part of what's led me to do this work. Is for some reason, ever since I was a little kid, I'm very shy, painfully shy as a kid. I just always was drawn to creative expression and felt like I had permission to do that. And I think a lot of people don't get that message. So I wanted to sing. I'm not that good at it, but that's not going to stop me, kind of thing.
I love
that. Yeah.
And that thank you for sharing that story. I mean, it's so interesting. Like I said at the start, it feels like a lot of the different dots in your life, like when I listen, you had so many different experiences, and then they've all come together. And you actually had to go through your own, you know, burnout experience really to get that low, to realize the opportunity around that. When I hear you speak, part of me thinks, golly, we've so undervalued creativity in our society. Like at this point in time, we seem to put a lot more emphasis on more, you know, analytical and data skills. You know, I know there's creativity involved in that, but we tend to underplay the importance of creative pursuits. And when I hear you speak, particularly in that experience that you had with people who were so traumatized, it's almost like becoming mindful. I mean, there's a big emphasis on mind, but you like lose yourself in the actual topic you're painting or singing, and suddenly time feels very different. You know, I've experienced that. When I heard you speaking, I thought that's exactly what you described. You can see why it's so helpful. Whatever chaos is going on around you, in a workplace, and clearly you came up against people who were deeply traumatized. But if you bring that back to community at work, so a lot of the work we do is about well-being at work, and that and I think we're at this point in time where well-being and work are both meaning different things to different people and are really changing. But you mentioned about community and educating community so that they can look after themselves at work, and I'd love to understand more about how communities at work. I'd love to understand your definition of community, which I think would be really interesting to understand, and also how communities within a workplace or groups or teams could really embrace some of your expertise to be able to be more mindful at work, be able to find equilibrium, using my language, be able to find balance so that they are in this flow state that we all look for, so they can produce their best work. And that's what the businesses want. They want their employees are the best. So community, and what does that look like?
Wow, big question. Yeah, I think it's interesting sometimes the idea of community suggests a group of people who are all united together, when in fact a lot of the times our community aren't people we've chosen, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. I think there's lots of great connections that can come with finding yourself in the same place as other people, in the same kind of work as other people, and those connecting factors there's an opportunity there to start to meet, and speak a similar language about your understandings of the world around you. And particularly, I think, at work, and I've worked for some large organizations, I've worked for government. I've had some really wonderful relationships with people at work that I've then never seen again when I've left that job. And at the time I'd think, no, I do want to see them, but it exists in a time and a place, and that counts for a lot. We invest so much time in our jobs that the people that we turn up and see every day matter an awful lot. So often, and particularly early on when I was doing lots of kind of crisis support work, your colleagues are the only other people that really truly understand what that's like. And so that's the same for most organizations or workplaces. And I've watched, I guess, having to have learnt really early on the cost that comes with not having any agency over how you manage your energy for work, and like, does your job get all of you, or do you save some for the other parts of your life? And I guess that's where that passion for education comes in, and just skyrocketed through the pandemic, because what I was hearing were people bumping up against the very understandable limitations of our human physiology, which is that humans aren't designed to just operate under a massive stress and threat and uncertainty and fear and a lack of safety day in, day out. And that's going to take a toll on our nervous system, on our entire sense of self in the world. And the idea that we could continue to be as productive and to be as switched on and to be as focused in our jobs is entirely unrealistic. And I think of it like trying to hike through the desert and then being annoyed at ourselves for getting thirsty. Like, it's just a biological, theological reality.
I love that. I love the way you've explained that to you. And you're like, how many organizations get that wrong? How many people get it wrong? Because we just don't recognize our limitations.
Yeah. And it's only a limitation until we just reconfigure how we manage our day and time. And so the work of Makeshift, which, I say we connect creativity and mental health, is really about trying to create the conditions and give people experiences where they get to play and get reminded what it feels like to play, which is this actually really vital experience for humans. And when we're able to do that, it is mindfulness, so it's calming and regulating our nervous systems. It's also just connecting us to joy and enjoyment of life, which is, when we think about finding equilibrium, it's actually important if we're then fitting that in around work and family and all the other things, it's important. And we know that when the more we get of that, the more we're able to turn up and function and be our best in our work. The way that we've been kind of, so I think it's a really important difference I want to make, that what we do isn't kind of about a therapeutic application of art. It's about creating the mindset and the conditions for people to play and be creative in ways that makes them feel good and is good for them, and kind of having to unwire a whole lot of the really messed up messages that people get, that I got, from my music teacher, that you have to be up here and otherwise don't bother. We've learned,
I was reminded, because I used to be good at art, and then I married an artist, and then as I suddenly I lost interest because of the standard was so high. I felt I can't compete, but then it's not about competition. It is about it's about playing. I love what you say there.
Yeah, and I mean, I always just bring back an analogy with physical exercise, because so many of us exercise without being professionals. And, if you see someone swimming laps, you don't think, well, they're clearly an Olympic swimmer. You think they like swimming. It must make them feel good. And my vision is that if someone's on a train and they're, drawing, or they're knitting, or they're, playing an instrument — people don't play instruments on trains — but, if people are practicing their creativity, it's just a normalized thing that we do in the world, because humans are actually innately creative. And for I would just meet people all the time that say, well, no, I'm not. And then we give them an experience where they relearn that they are. And it's always quite transformative.
I love that. So building on that, there's so many questions that come out of that. But from a practical point of view and an organizational point of view, so if we're kind of sold on the importance of creativity, we're sold on the fact that we are programmed to play and programmed to have fun, and much of the way we're living our lives is opposite to what we're naturally designed to do, which is, I think, what you're saying. And organizations are effectively communities of people that come together, whether they choose to be there, they're all there. So what can an organization, a leadership team, when they see that, and they're very keen to tap into that potential that they have, but our whole environment has become a lot more analytical, a lot more process focused, a lot more pressure, a lot more challenges, a lot more change that we're all coping with. So not designed to kind of deal with that. But one of the solutions is play. And I love this, and creativity, and we all have that around that. So what are some of the things that corporates could do potentially to really tap into the natural resource that they already have within their people?
Yeah. I think there's heaps. What I would start with is, firstly, normalizing daydreaming time. And we know that for creativity to happen in the first place, we need time that's untethered to any task or outcome. You can't go from one meeting to another meeting. You've got 10 minutes in between. It's like, okay, quickly play. Like, that's not going to work, because it's a process, right? So to get into that kind of state. So normalizing time for thinking, and, certainly what I've found, because we've implemented this absolutely in our workplace at Makeshift and in my work week, is most of the solutions that I arrive at for programming a particular course or workshop, or coming up with the best delivery for a client, is in that daydreaming time. It's not at the meeting. So I think that's a really important thing. I think that having opportunities for teams to play with each other and have fun is a really low stakes environment to practice really good relationship building in an organization. So it's actually this great opportunity to build psychological safety, because you know, let's make something together. And I mean, if it doesn't work out, it's no great disaster, which is what creativity requires. It requires taking a leap of faith, having a go and not being sure if it's going to work out. And that's really powerful. And then the third thing I'd say is that it's a myth that this needs to take a huge amount of time. You know, we know we've been kind of harvesting all the studies we can possibly find that looks at what happens when you draw on a page, or when you move your body in a, you know, potent, interesting and curious way, and it's interacting with our nervous system very immediately. So, you know, what we do in our courses is encourage people to build a habit, so that if you're, you know, really under the pump at work and you're feeling really, you know, wired and you can't really think straight, to have a 10-minute practice you can go to. And, you know, we describe it as creativity, but it's anything that gets you into that zone. It could be just a walk around the block. It's usually going to be changing the scene. So leaving your desk, and again, organizations giving permission from the top to leave your desk, to have a 10-minute circuit breaker. You know, we're not designed to just go without breaks, you know, help us reset, recalibrate, restore. You know, 10 minutes of just creative writing or whatever it is that resonates with you. And that's another important thing, is people need to find something that they like and they enjoy.
No, yeah. I love that. What's your view on devices? Because when I hear you speak and play and fun and all those things, I remember working with one client in America, and they had a lot of developers, and they had this, they called it the cave. And basically they did exactly, the developers left their desks and went to this cave, and then they played games with each other. So like computer games. So I'd love your view on devices, because, you know, I've got a teenage son, and, you know, that's his way of play. He plays a lot, but it tends to be, you know, computer games, as opposed to, and he plays with other people. So I'm going to get some of those benefits that you're describing. But you know, part of the challenge is, it seems to be, it's not away from the desk, it's not away from the screen in the ways that some of those other things that you taught. It's collaborative, but they don't actually meet in person. But I'd love your perspective on that as a method of playing, if you like.
Well, look, I don't claim to have any expertise on the research around, you know, device use. And I also have a son who loves gaming, and I've really had to come around in understanding how important that is to him and how much he gets out of it. I think the useful question is this shifting me through a feeling to something different, or is it costing me something? You know, so it's a bit like a lot of the conversations in lockdown, when we're all in lockdown, where, you know, is it okay to watch 7 episodes on Netflix every night? And we all did that. And, you know, I suppose I've come to understand these as both important, but we need both. One is self-soothing. And so self-soothing can just give us a bit of a break. It's like a bit of zoning out. Our mind just kind of it's not really activated up much at all. It's just on a bit of autopilot, maybe playing a game, maybe, you know, I do a crossword on my phone every day. And if I don't do it, I'm like, I didn't get to do my crossword today. That's obviously device interactive, but they're self-soothing, you know, they're making us feel better in that moment. Self-care, which is a term I use reluctantly, because I know it's almost so overused that it doesn't mean anything anymore. But ultimately, a self-care practice is going to shift you through from feeling stressed or overwhelmed or exhausted or anxious to something else, to feeling different, to feeling like that has shifted. And so sometimes those practices are harder to begin because they're not as instantly soothing. So it's a bit like, again, with the exercise analogy, you know, you're like, oh, I don't really feel like going for that run, but you at the end, you know you're not going to regret it. You're going to feel amazing.
No, I get it. So what I hear you say is almost like it is about a balance. It comes back to this word equilibrium, because just because some is good doesn't mean a lot is better. You know,
that's
so
right.
going for a run, that's going to help you. But if you're running all the time, then that's going to have a negative, that's going to cost you more. So understanding the balance for you, using a device to play a game is not bad, but if you're gaming for 8 hours a day, that's right, perhaps not so good. And you know, so it's finding the balance for you.
And I think it's the same with social media, which, you know, that conversation of, is it bad for us, or it's bad for your mental health? Well, it depends how you use it. And I think the sooner we as humans get clear that we can be in charge of what it looks like for us. And so follow things that make you feel good, not that take from you, not that actually deplete your sense of well-being.
It is managing that, I suppose, in this, going back to what you said right at the start, that we've been designed not to live with this level of pressure. And of course, a lot of mainstream culture is naturally bringing pressure. So social media brings a lot of benefits, but again, it can lead to a lot of negative feelings, because you're comparing often other people's best to your worst. It depends on the moment. You know, and likewise, the mainstream news can be very negative, and that can make you feel bad. So it is about finding your own toolkit to really support yourself and remain informed, but not feel that, you know, life is miserable and grim, and that really impacts your mental health.
Yeah, that's right. It's just building that muscle of having agency over what you consume, because we now live in a culture where there's just a never-ending, relentless stream of information coming at us. So just because that's there doesn't mean we have to engage with it. We can decide and make decisions about what works.
Absolutely. I feel your early experience, what you shared before when you were 20 and you were like self-managed, that probably set you up very well, because I think a lot of people are not used to being self-managed.
Yeah, I know. It was like both an incredibly good thing to happen, but also hard.
It is hard. It's making those choices. Okay, well, we're almost out of time, so it kind of it leads us nicely on to the question that I always ask all of my guests, and there's two parts of the question. So the first part is, what does finding equilibrium mean to you? I feel in some ways we've been answering that throughout this conversation, and then the other part, you know, given the work that you do, running a business, you know, having, you know, a family, doing all the things that you do, you're going to encounter a lot of pressures and challenges in your day-to-day life. So I'd love to know what you do personally, if you're happy to share, to find your balance and to maintain a sense of well-being each and every day.
Yeah, thank you. Well, yeah, look, I think what finding equilibrium means now is, after going through the experience of having young children and running a business. Where I live, I don't have any family nearby, and when my kids were young, my partner commuted to Sydney, so there wasn't equilibrium. So part of, as Makeshift has grown, is really being, you know, we're very passionate about working in a way that reflects the values of what we're putting out into the world. So now it looks very different. And sometimes I have people say, oh, you're so lucky. Your job means you get to pick the kids up from school. I'm like, well, I've spent years kind of engineering it to be this way for a really long time. I think the myth about equilibrium is that we have all the things all of the time, and that's just not true. So now what it looks like for me is having practices or rhythms or anchors in my life that are always there, and some days I don't get to them, but I trust that I will. So I think it's not panicking, and us humans are very critical of ourselves. And so there can be a lot of, I should be exercising more, and I should be eating better, and I should be seeing friends more. And I've really let go of all those internal messages of the shoulds. It's taken practice to do that. But now if I think, well, I haven't got to exercise this week, but I trust that I will next week. It's not over. It's not like that.
Yeah, exactly. It's so true. The past doesn't dictate the future. And you can see that on a daily basis, really. Just because you didn't exercise today doesn't mean you can't exercise tomorrow.
So I think it is a bit of mindfulness of just kind of, this is what's happening now, and knowing I have the choice tomorrow or later or at some other point to make things different. And, I guess, again, the second part of your question, it's come from being very actively and intentionally working to build the practices that I have that do help me have that kind of equilibrium. Again, because I talk about that constantly in my work, it's almost like I feel like a fraud if I don't actually do it.
Exactly.
But in saying that, I have always had, lots of kind of interests outside of work. And for me, it's just become non-negotiable. They're just non-negotiable parts of, at the other part, I think, for me, of holding or finding equilibrium is accepting what balls I'm going to drop, because understanding that balls will drop and kind of naming what they're going to be.
I like that. I think that's great. Rather than trying to be perfect and then focusing on the balls that have dropped and not the ones that remain in the air. So ignoring your strengths, in other words, and just focusing on the problems.
That's right. I think what I want to help other people bring into their lives is never dropping the ball of looking after yourself.
That's a ball that's got to stay. I love that. That's really great. So, Caitlin, where can people find out more about you and the work you're doing and Makeshift?
So we've got a website, makeshift.org.au. We're on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. We run lots of we have 8-week and 4-week programs that are really just about helping people explore different creative practices at the same time as learning about your nervous system and your stress response, and having an experience of then doing a creative practice and noticing how that changes how you feel, and then building up habits, so that they become easy to turn to when you need them the most. We also run lots of workplace-based experiences and workshops for teams and large groups. We run mental health first aid training. You can find out all about that on our website.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Caitlin, for spending time with us today and for sharing. It was really great to speak to you. I really enjoyed it. I must do one of your programs. They sound awesome. Like it really has been a very inspiring conversation. So thank you for that. And I guess the last point I'll say is, you highlighted something to me, which is about choice. And I think in the moment, we often think that we don't have choice, but of course we do. And that in itself is very, very empowering. So thank you, Caitlin. And
thank you.
Congratulations on all the great work that you're doing.
Thank you. Likewise. Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for your time and your attention today. And we'll be back with another episode very shortly.